USS Pharris. All ahead 1/3, the executive officer ordered. All ahead 1/3, aye, the quartermaster of the watch responded, moving the annunciator handle up from the ahead full setting. A moment later, the inside pointer changed also. Engine room answers, all ahead 1/3. Very well. Pharris slowed, coming off a 25-knot sprint to commence another drift maneuver, and allowing her towed array sonar to listen for hostile submarines. Morris was in his bridge chair, going over messages from shore. He rubbed his eyes and lit up another Pall Mall. "Bridge," called the urgent voice of a lookout. "Periscope feather on the port bow. Halfway to the horizon, port bow." Morris snatched his binoculars from the holder and had them to his eyes in an instant. He didn't see anything. "Battle stations," ordered the XO. The alarm gong went off a second later, and weary men ran again to their posts. Morris looped his binoculars around his neck and ran down the ladder to his battle station in CIC. The sonar loosed a dozen ranging pings to port as Morris took his position in CIC. Nothing. The helo lifted off as the frigate maneuvered north, allowing her towed array sonar to track on the possible contact. "Passive sonar contact. Evaluate as possible submarine bearing 013, announced the towed array operator. "Steam noises. Sounds like a possible nuke." "I got nothing there," said the active sonar operator. Morris and his ASW officer examined the water conditions board. There was a layer at 200 feet. The passive sonar was below it. And could well be hearing a submarine that the active pings could not reach. The lookout might have seen anything from a spouting whale. This was the mating season for humpbacks, to a streak of foam, or the feathery wake left by a periscope. If it was a submarine, he had plenty of time to duck under the layer. The target was too close to be bottom-bounced, and too far for the sonar to blast directly through the layer. "Less than 5 miles, ASW said. "More than 2. If this is a sub, we're up against a good one." "Great. Get the helo on him right now." Morris examined the plot. The submarine could have heard his frigate as it sprinted at 25 knots. Now, at reduced speed, and with Prairie Masker operating, Pharris would be very hard to detect. So the sub's fire control solution had probably just gone out the window. But Morris didn't have one either, and the submarine was perilously close. An urgent contact report was radioed to the screen commander 20 miles away. The Sea Sprite dropped a pattern of sonobuoys. Minutes passed. "I got a weak signal on number 6 and a medium on number 4. The sonobuoy petty officer said. Morris watched the plot. That made the contact less than 3 miles off. "Drop some pingers," he ordered. Behind him, the ship's weapons officer ordered the arming of the ASROC and torpedo launchers. 3 miles off, the helicopter turned and swept across the target area, dropping 3 cast buoys this time, which sent out active, non-directional pings. "Contact," A strong contact on buoy 9. Classify as possible submarine. I got him. Bearing 015. This one's a sub. Classify as positive submarine contact, said the towed array man. He just increased power. Some cavitation sounds. Single screw submarine, maybe a Victor class. Bearing changing rapidly left to right. The active sonar still didn't have him, despite continuous maximum power pings down the correct line of bearing. The submarine was definitely under the layer. Morris wanted to maneuver, but decided against it. A radical turn would cause his towed array sonar to curve, rendering it useless for several minutes. Then he would have to depend on sonobuoys alone, and Morris trusted his towed sonar more than the buoys. Bearing to contact is now 015 and steady. Noise level is down somewhat. The operator pointed at his screen. Morris was surprised. The contact bearing had been changing rapidly and was now steadied down. The helicopter made yet another pass. A new sonobuoy registered the contact, but the mad gear didn't confirm the presence of a submarine and the contact was fading. The noise level continued to drop. Morris watched the relative position of the contact pass aft. What the hell was this character doing? Periscope, starboard bow, the talker reported. Wrong place, sir. Unless we're looking at a noisemaker, the operator said. The ASW officer had the active sonar change bearing, and the results were immediate. Contact bearing 345, range 1,500 yards. A bright pip glowed on the sonar scope. All ahead flank, Morris yelled. Somehow the submarine had evaded the towed sonar, then popped up atop the layer and run up his periscope. That could only mean one thing. Right full rudder. Hydrophone effects, torpedoes inbound, bearing 351. Instantly, the weapons officer ordered the launch of an anti-submarine torpedo down the same bearing in the hope that it would disturb the attacking submarine. If the Russians' torpedoes were wire-guided, he'd have to cut the wires free to maneuver the sub clear of the American return shot. Morris raced up the ladder to the bridge. Maneuvered into firing position. The frigate changed course and speed in an attempt to ruin the submarine's fire control solution. I see one, the XO said, pointing over the bow. The Soviet torpedo left a visible white trail on the surface. Morris noted it, something he had not expected. The frigate turned rapidly. Bridge, I showed 2 torpedoes bearing constant 350 and decreasing range. The tactical action officer said rapidly. Both are pinging at us. The Nixie is operating. Morris lifted a phone. Report the situation to the escort commander. Done, Skipper. 2 more helos are heading this way. Pharris was now doing 20 knots and accelerating, turning her stern to the torpedoes. Her helicopter was now aft of the beam, frantically making runs with its magnetic anomaly detector, trying to locate the Soviet sub. The torpedo's wake crossed past the frigate's bow, as Morris's ship kept her helm over. There was an explosion aft. White water leaped 100 feet. Russian fish collided with the Nixie torpedo decoy. But they had only one Nixie deployed. There was another torpedo out there. Left full rudder, Morris told the quartermaster. Combat. What about the contact? The frigate was now doing 25 knots. Not sure, sir. The sonobuoys have our torp, but nothing else. We're gonna take a hit, the XO said. He pointed to a white trail on the water. less than 200 yards away. It must have missed the frigate on its first try, then turned for another. Homing torpedoes kept looking until they ran out of fuel. There was nothing Morris could do. The torpedo was approaching on his port bow. If he turned right, it would only give the fish a larger target. Below him, the ASROC launcher swung left toward the probable location of the submarine. But without an order to fire, all the operator could do was train it out. The white wake kept getting closer. Morris leaned over the rail, staring at it with mute rage as it extended like a finger toward his bow. It couldn't possibly miss now. That's not real smart, Captain. Bosun Clark's hand grabbed Morris's shoulder and yanked him down to the deck. He was just grabbing for the executive officer when it hit. The impact lifted Morris a foot off the steel deck. He didn't hear the explosion, but an instant after he had bounced off the steel a second time, he was deluged with a sheet of white water that washed him against a stanchion. His first thought was that he'd been thrown overboard. He rose to see his executive officer, headless, slumped against the pilot house door. The bridge wing was torn apart, the stout metal shielding ripped by fragments. The pilot house windows were gone. What he saw next was worse. The torpedo had struck the frigate just aft of the bow-mounted sonar. Already the bow had collapsed, the keel sundered by the explosion. The forecastle was awash, and the horrible groaning of metal told him that the bow was being ripped off his ship. Morris staggered into the bridge and yanked the annunciator handle to all stop, failing to notice that the engineers had already stopped engines. The ship's momentum pushed her forward. As Morris watched, the bow twisted to starboard, 10 degrees off true, and the forward gun mount became awash, its crew trying to head aft.